then what do we need? Well, we need policies that sit in there, and some of the policies that we have had, such as the dieselisation of our vehicle fleet, urban combined heat and power, biomass, so wood and solid fuel burning, definitely are bad things. And I would argue for air pollution, I would argue there have been no benefit for climate either. You can see here the things that we really do need, from solar, wind, electric vehicles, heat pumps, active travel, home insulation and livable cities. But I argue that we need a third axis, and I'm staggeringly bad at graphics. So you're just going to have to kind of be with me and imagine a third axis coming out from the page here. And that would be health benefit. And there's a lot of difference in the health benefit from those choices that we make. We could just replace petrol and diesel vehicles with electric ones. That might benefit air pollution and climate. But if we then swap those motorised for active travel, we get all of the bonuses that come with increased exercise. So not only climate and air pollution, urban noise that we don't talk enough about, but also the direct health benefits that arise from just increased amounts of daily exercise. Same with our homes. We could fit heat pumps to everything, but if we went for incentivising, let's say, home solar as well as home insulation, then we could lift many more people out of fuel poverty at the same time as decarbonising. But you know all these things as well. But that's where it needs to be within the policy axis, and it's not recognised. Climate, air pollution and health are not connecting. What happens if we do net zero? There's been a study just done recently by my colleagues at Imperial, and just in further context, WHO, World Health Organization, Maria Neira, who talks on environment and is their spokesperson, spoke in London, and she framed this nicely. The greatest public health intervention that will be made this century will be that of however you want to frame it, net zero, fighting our climate emergency. This study just looked at the travel aspects of net zero and investing in our homes. And you can read the numbers here, but there are eye-wateringly large gains in financial gains in terms of averted costs because of less illness. And, you know, this permeates through society. The time you have to take off work if your child is ill, if you're older, if you look after older relatives, exactly the same. We have the similar figures from the US, or similar types of study. In there, it's thought that there could be between 4,000 and 15,000 fewer deaths per year in the US by 2035, saving a staggering 65. So I got my NB and BN the wrong way around, to 128 billion by 2035. So the opportunities are vast. So in closing, what do we actually want? Well, we want low carbon, we want low air pollution, we want diverse, we want inclusive, socially inclusive, healthy city, towns and countrysides. And these are all entirely buildable. And to be honest, when it comes to thinking about the way our streets, and I'm probably sure Stroud was laid out, you know, anywhere that's been built more than about 40 odd years ago is built without really focusing it around motorised travel. So by repurposing a lot of this street space, we can cure many of these problems and bring about great benefits. You'll see this character on his space hopper outside a local primary school, and he's beaming from ear to ear, having this additional space in the road as part of a play street to actually play outside. So, you know, if motivation, if you're looking for motivation, you know, think about what it might be like to live in these lovely green streets. Also think of that lad and maybe the future size of the lungs that he will grow. So I'm going to finish at that point, and all I really wanted to say, if there's one thing you can take away here, yes, air pollution is affecting our health in massive ways that, you know, it's totally avoidable. It's a preventable health problem, but solving it is not impossible. So I'll stop at that point. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Gary. really fascinating talk. I think it's really great that you're bringing it to life in these different ways that are more tangible. I feel for people to understand, like their health impacts is something that I can really understand, and that you can see that clear benefit, the gain, not just in terms of like individual health, but in terms of like the health of the health system,
Mm.
and the impact that it could have in terms of easing what is happening right now in a lot of our hospitals and in a lot of our GP practices that are obviously bogged down with lack of resource, but also because of the impact these different health issues are having on all of us. So what we usually do is we take questions in the chat, and feel free to pop any links or anything that you've got that you want to share in there. And then we'll do all three of the presentations, and then we will go to questions, and we'll invite people to ask the questions at the end. So thank you for kicking us off there. And I'm sure there'll be lots of bits and pieces in the chat coming up. So our second speaker of the day is Tom Jarman, who is the co-founder of Community R4C, which is a community-owned organization advocating for lower cost, environmentally sustainable waste management. He's going to share their legal structure against the legal struggle against the installation of the incinerator, and the latest research on the true cost of this incinerator, which apparently is the most expensive in the country. Current progress on legal advice and auditor complaints, and how this leads the way forward, which can mean less incineration of household waste, less pollution, and lower costs. So thank you, Tom Jarman, and I'll hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Jenny, and what a fantastic talk, Gary. Thank you very much. So the first thing I want to do is just share what is really quite a positive story, and a story of fantastic perseverance by community in Gloucestershire. We've been fighting against the incinerator since 2007, some of you possibly even earlier than that. Thousands and thousands of people have been objecting, but we've really been stuck in a horrendous democratic deficit and had something forced on us that we didn't want. Well, we are very much now at a turning point, and I want to share what's happening right now with a quick history, and really just to, I hope, thank you and encourage you and say that all of that fantastic work in objecting to this horrendous thing was not in vain. So yeah, an enormous amount of public money up in smoke, and yeah, that's a picture of our incinerator with its plume. You can't always see the plume. That's from Ash at Plume Plotter. If you've not been to his site, fantastic little site he's got showing the effect of that plume as it goes forward. Sorry, couldn't click my slide forward. So very quickly, they call it an energy from waste plant. That's quite misleading. Its primary purpose is to incinerate waste. It has a small byproduct of a little bit of electricity generation, but its purpose is to incinerate waste, and therefore it produces a lot of incineration output. It's £613 million contract, the most expensive contract the council has ever entered into, 25 years plus 5 more on top of that, 30-year contract. Costs us £25 million per annum. Would you believe that's more than 50% more than we used to pay for landfill? So that's, you know, a big increase in cost to have this horrendous thing. Within the contract, we're obliged to send a minimum amount of waste to the incinerator, put or pay. So if we don't put it, we still pay for it. So in effect, it's a big disincentive for recycling, and which is why we burn so much plastic and recyclables, electronics, etc. And it has huge pollution effects. This is one of the many brilliant signs and protests. Huge and terrible mistake. It was horrendous. Is horrendous. I'm not going to talk much about pollution, partly because I'm not an expert, but there's really 3 types of pollutants that come out of an incinerator. You have the toxic emissions, in other words, those that immediately affect health, and those are dioxins and heavy metals, acids, other things. Also the particulates, and the UBB, the operator of the incinerator, or now FCC, will tell you how they scrub out all the particulates in the chimney stack. Well, they only smug out scrub out up to a certain size. The very small particulates, I'm not sure whether you correctly call them PM1s, but the ones that are smaller than PM2.5 still get through those scrubbers, and there's billions of those, and those also have an adverse impact. And then there's the climate pollutants, the carbon dioxide. The BBC, working with UK Wind, have just come out with a major piece of work which says that the incinerators are the dirtiest way to generate power if you measure by CO2 emissions, meaning that the carbon dioxide produced by burning plastic, fossil fuels, is even worse than a coal-powered power station for the amount of electricity it produces. So that's horrendous. Why on earth would the public enter into this kind of thing, or why would a local government enter into this sort of thing on our behalf? Well, it must be to save money, mustn't it? Well, that, I'm afraid, is not the good news. It's hugely expensive. We've done a big piece of work. It's taken us about a year to extract the data because the county council has been miserable about sharing data about the incinerator. It's kept us in the dark, basically to hide the true horrors of this thing. And so what this chart shows you, can you see my indicators? I hope you can. Anybody give me a thumbs up to say you can see my pointer? Anyway,
Yep.
in 2019,
Yeah, we can.
Lovely. In 2019, the incinerator started operation, and the green line here is the additional cost of the incinerator compared to landfill. So if you look at the cost of sending waste to landfill at current costs of sending to landfill, including landfill tax, the incinerator costs us £40 million more over 5 years. So £8 million more a year we're spending as local taxpayers to send our waste to the incinerator compared to landfill. And of course, landfill is neither the cheapest nor the best way to deal with waste. But that isn't the only horror from this thing in terms of financial. The biggest part of the cost of landfill is a landfill tax. We put a tax on landfill because we wanted to change behavior. We wanted to stop people sending waste to landfill. And but when we send it to the incinerator, instead of, and that landfill tax over the last 5 years would have been £60 million. That would have gone from the county council to HMRC. So we would have paid from one part of the public purse to another part of the public purse, £60 million. Now that £60 million goes to the operator, to the financial advisors, and all the crooks and cronies that hang on to these huge contracts. So over 5 years, we have spent out of the public purse £100 million, £20 million a year, more than we needed to end up with this horror. If that doesn't make you very angry, you're quite different to me. It obviously makes us very angry. So surely we try to do something about it. Well, in Gloucestershire, we did an awful lot. I'm going to just show you a few pictures. I'm sorry if your picture's not up here, if you were part of the actions since 2007, from Glossvane, from No Mo in Glow, from Extinction Rebellion, which I think pretty much was born on the steps of the incinerator. These the Javelin Park 4 here being released after being found not guilty. Sarah London, fantastic Green councillor, fighting so hard against the incinerator. Many little protests, many big protests as well. A couple here that I bring out. You're probably aware that we had absolutely remarkable. Sid Saunders had a 2-week hunger strike on the steps of Shire Hall, and his hunger strike was all about getting information about the contract known to the public. Unbelievable effort by him, but also absolutely incredible that we are so committed within Gloucestershire that somebody should do this. Semi-naked protests, people getting themselves arrested trying to stop concrete lorries. I want to talk a little bit also about what we as a community did from about 2012, where a large number of people set up an organisation called Community R4C. That's a community-owned organisation. And basically, it was formed on this principle. We were kind of fed up of protesting against something, and we wanted to fight for something. So we set up community R4C. So you never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. And that was our vision. A community engaged, community empowered resource recovery, recycling, refining center, which would reduce, would reuse, recover materials. And we raised a lot of community shareholder money, donations and support. And we had fantastic support. You may remember Jeremy Irons, Jonathan Porritt, hundreds of people supporting this. And basically, we wanted to build this alternative. But unfortunately, we had a county council that was bent on forcing this horrendous contract on us, this incinerator on us. So we ended up as Community R4C fighting, having to first fight against that incinerator. And we were pretty successful. We did a lot of work. We raised a big challenge through the Audit Act, the special provision within the Audit Act that allows you to challenge contracts. And we eventually took the county council to High Court. Now, given that we're a small community organisation and we had 30 days over Christmas to put together the funds to sue the county council on a £600 million contract, that is an absolutely incredible achievement. And you know what? We won. Apart from something of a establishment stitch-up, we won on two key points. The two key points were, first of all, that the information about this contract had been hidden from the public. That was illegal. Secondly, the contract almost certainly, or certainly, is a breach of procurement law, and therefore should have been rescinded and replaced. And that it also breached EU state aid law. Now, the judge ruled in our favour on those things, but he ruled against us because he said that a small community organisation like us couldn't possibly have bid for this contract. Now, I sincerely disagree with him. We tried to appeal, but we weren't given leave to appeal. And I think he's absolutely wrong, but it's all part of the establishment stitch-up, which says, no, you have to have, you as a community have to have this hundreds of millions of pound solution to a problem. I don't care that you've got a group of hundreds, thousands of people locally that want a better solution. You have to have this big money solution. On the audit challenge, the auditor came back and said, you know what, well, I'm going to issue a public interest report. Now, that's a formal rebuke and also would start changes to what was actually happening. But then, under pressure from the county council, it delayed release of that report until after the 2021 county council elections. And not only did it delay release of the report, it changed the conclusion. It removed the public interest report. Now, the report was still highly critical, but it said, oh, I can't reach a conclusion on whether or not this was or wasn't a breach of procurement law because we haven't looked at it enough. They'd looked at it for 4.5 years. So it's all part of an establishment stitch-up. Well, anyway, we've been following up on that, and some things have happened. These changes, these things are really useful, significant steps forward. The first is we've got this detailed report on the incinerator costs. That's been independently verified. It's published on UK Win, and it shows that it is probably the most expensive in the country. Or put it another way, nobody knows of any incinerator that is more expensive. So we've got hard and fast data that we had this hugely expensive contract forced on us. We have a new administration in the county council, so no longer do we have an administration that's trying to cover up the wrongdoings of the past, of this illegal procurement and the wrongdoing that went on in that. But we have a cross-party support for doing something about this. And you see the picture at the bottom right, myself and Tricia Watson, who was also a director of Community R4C, but is also a district councillor. And we and others are working cross-party with the county council to review the contract and seek changes. We've just heard from the auditor's professional body, it took them 5 years, that they are now finally going to start a formal investigation into breaches of duty by the auditor, Grant Thornton. And we've commissioned some legal advice from our barrister, which basically shows, well, the contract was wrongly awarded, it's breach of procurement law, breach of state aid law, and there was a breach of public duty in terms of openness, etc. Now, all of those issues give us leverage to get changes to the contract. That's what we need to do first. Step one, get changes to the contract. So this sort of cute little graphic shows a way forward from that horrendous incinerator. The first thing is a contract review. Now that's something that the new administration, the county council, needs to do for itself. It's basically say, look, let's have a look at that contract. How do we get into it? Is it the right contract to be into? And do we have grounds, do we have mechanisms to renegotiate the contract? Now, there's strong reasons to do that. Firstly, it's usually expensive. Secondly, I've not gone into this, but there's a new, effectively a tax that will come in 2028, which will make the incinerator even more expensive to operate and means that we must remove plastics before the incinerator. We must do that anyway. So we want to renegotiate the contract to remove the minimum waste obligation. So no longer do we have to send a minimum amount of waste. We can actually reduce it and recycle and stop waste going into the incinerator. That we can recover costs for the county council for all this wrongdoing from the advisors, possibly certain officers, including the chief executive, who some of you may well know was investigated by the police for 18 months for his wrongdoing. So there's very serious issues to be looked into here and potential for recovery. And all of this basically to prepare the way to ensure that we don't just throw all of our mixed residual waste into the incinerator, but we remove all the plastics, all the recyclates from that waste stream, and we don't burn those, which will obviously reduce pollution, reduce costs because there'll be less to do, and dramatically reduce our carbon footprint. To do that, we will need to have a pre-sorting facility, a pre-sorting plant. Now, it's perfectly possible to take mixed residual waste and to sort it automatically or semi-automatically and remove the plastics, the electronic goods, on all of these recyclable materials that you do not want to be burning. Quite frankly, once you do that, you'll have very little left to burn. But a pre-sorting plant will remove them, allow them to be recycled, reused in some cases, and not incinerated. And lastly, still somewhere in my little dream, and maybe not for me, but maybe for somebody else, the community R4C plant that we sort of talked about before, a trash for treasure facility, a reuse facility, something like that can be built alongside or using the facility at the incinerator so that we no longer burn most waste, but we actually reduce it, recover it, and reuse it. So that's where we are. I'm enormously optimistic with following the change of control that we had at the county council. You may know I stood for county council myself, partly because, well, very largely because I really wanted to drive this agenda or help drive this agenda within the county council. But I'm very pleased to say that even though I wasn't elected, there is a lot of cross-party support to do something about this. What about you? This is an invitation to anybody who is there. First of all, it's a big thanks to all of you that have been involved historically. Hasn't been a waste of time, hasn't been a waste of effort. It's all built up and we can now do something about it. Please do get in touch if you're interested. Please get in touch with the county councillor, ask him to support the renegotiation of the incinerator contract. We can demand compensation from our errant advisors, Grant Thornton et al. And others. To continue to demand openness and accountability. What we had at the county council in terms of democratic deficit was appalling. I mean, the hunger strike is just the pinnacle of that you know, quite incredible that you needed a hunger strike to get the details of the contract released to the public. But we need to continue to demand that. I'm very pleased that we do have, in a Lib Dem administration and with, you know, the Green support, etc., we do have a much higher commitment to that sort of openness and accountability. And finally, if anybody's interested in sort of the go forward about this, how, you know, how do you produce a reuse plant, you know, and reduction, recycling initiatives, and perhaps a sorting plant, perhaps there's going to be a new trash to treasure initiative coming up in the future. So thank you very much. Thank you for all of those who've been fighting and supporting in the past, and love to hear from any of you.
Thanks so much, Tom. Fantastic. It's so great to hear about these community projects. I know that Stroud has a lot of example of people-powered community projects that we could look at, but I think that this is one that really shows, I mean, it shows the test of time. People have really been so committed to this for so long, and it's great to see that things are moving continuously. I mean, I used to live in Stonehouse, so I've seen the beauty myself of the monstrosity that is. But I think that it's so important that we keep pushing this, and that things like contract reviews and getting legal advice is something that we can start to do again, because I think these things don't go away by themselves, and there's so many government contracts around the world, around the country, that we think, actually, is this the right thing? Was it the right thing in the first place? Does it continue to be the right thing? And can we do something about it? So hats off to everybody that is involved. And I'm sure I can see already that there's a lot of questions in the chat. So we'll come to those in a minute. But we'll just hear from our final speaker first. So we've got Ruth Kettle-Frisbee, who's the co-founder of Clean the Air in Havering, a group connected to Mums for Lungs, a Quaker organisation whose purpose is to raise awareness about air pollution, tackle misinformation, and champion the right to clean air for everyone. Ruth has taken Havering Council to court via judicial review as a desperate last resort to challenge their recent decision not to designate land as contaminated. And hopefully they'll be successful. But if they are, Havering Council and the Environment Agency will have to clean up the site once and for all. So, Ruth, I will hand over to you as our final speaker. Thanks.
Thank you. Just to clarify, nothing that I don't, neither Mums for Lungs nor Clear the Air Havering are Quaker organisations. I happen to be a Quaker. But yeah, just wanted to
sorry about that.
kind of, clear that up. Yes, so I will just, hopefully everyone, can you all see that okay?
Yep, we can see the slides.
Lovely. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you about my campaigning with Mums for Lungs and where it's led me. So the fight for clean air is an important facet of the fight for climate justice, and that's where I got started with it, really. And indeed, social justice is one of the main reasons that I became a Quaker. I helped to form Havering Climate Coalition and Clear the Air in Havering, which has a double meaning, because a lot of air needs clearing politically and socially, as well as chemically. And indeed, it's why I joined the Green Party as well. I mean, that's what I care about, social justice in particular. So I live in Havering, which is a Greater London borough, and Greater London boroughs like Havering, who are kind of outer London, tend overwhelmingly not only to be on the fringes of London geographically, but also politically. Campaigning for air pollution here has been a tough gig, especially when it comes to raising public awareness of the harmful health impacts of air pollution that Gary's been talking about. So I've got 2 young girls, and as a mother carer to my eldest daughter, she's now 8 and is profoundly disabled. She has got a rare genetic condition and can't walk or talk, and I tend to centre disabled children in all of my activism. I always do my best to uphold disabled children and to join up various intersections of social injustice. I think that's the way to go. I think that so often there are kind of silos and identity politics, and I'm really interested and really passionate about your fight is my fight, kind of joining up. How can I help you? How can you help me? Where do we share common goals? So again, as Gary was saying, the research is clear. Air pollution is a top environmental threat to human health. And while air pollution impacts all of our health, all the way from, well, the womb, actually, all the way into our elderly years, it is children who really are at the sharp edge of the harmful health impacts. And and as Gary says in his long-term research, throughout the course of a person's life, those risks will change and accumulate. So it's marginalised communities, children from marginalised communities, who suffer the worst impacts. Children clearly have no culpability at all for the climate crisis, so it's heartbreaking to discover that they are most susceptible to its harm. This is disproportionately worse for children from global majority backgrounds and children who experience poverty, both of whom tend to live near main roads, where the air quality is the most harmful. Disabled children often have existing underlying conditions, a wider range than you think, of which are exacerbated by air pollution. So the respiratory conditions and cardiovascular conditions are one aspect of the harmful health impacts, but later on in life, dementia and in teenagers, psychotic episodes. Again, please look at Gary's research to look in more depth at how a person's life cycle is affected by air pollution and the knowledge to date about that. Back to children, due to their height, children walking or being pushed in buggies and prams or wheelchairs or scooting have been, clearly have closer proximity to exhaust pipes on the street. And what's more, children breathe quicker than adults. And we know that air pollution can stunt child lung growth. At Mums for Lungs, we campaign not only to clean up our air, but for the designers of infrastructure to create radical new paradigms and visions for safer streets and cleaner air. We are suspicious of potentially greenwashing technology. Even electric vehicles, which are good insofar as they do not emit nitrogen dioxide via exhausts, and have been lauded predominantly in long-term plans to improve air quality, they have been shown to contribute to harmful and highly insidious PM 2.5, which is particulate matter so tiny it can enter the bloodstream and even cross the blood-brain barrier, as opposed to being filtered out. So tyre wear is the kind of vehicle for the PM 2.5 with electric vehicles. They're much heavier and much heavier than internal combustion engines. And of course, there is a crossover here between that I've actually written about in Vision Zero for London, their journal, about the intersection between harm from air pollution on the roads and collision. So clearly there's a crossover here between these much larger, heavier vehicles and the potential to harm through collision as well as through air pollution. Another a recent fight from Mums for Lungs, a very topical one at the moment, is diesel engines. At one point, diesel engines were lauded as the healthy option, and then that was redacted, and a lot of car drivers in Havering feel pretty upset about this. So diesel engines are by far the most polluting, and Mums for Lungs are campaigning against diesel and also against wood burners. Often a middle-class luxury in the form of contemporary wood-burning stoves that, unbeknownst to well-meaning members of the public, are more polluting than traffic and harm the poorest, most vulnerable members of society disproportionately. So there's the person in the house that's burning the wood, but then they might be shielded from the smell. But of course, that those particulates are coming out of the home and affecting people who tend to be marginalised and more susceptible to the harmful impacts the hardest. The UK's largest source of PM 2.5 is the so again it's these wood burners that are the most predominant source of PM 2.5, and it's a real battle really, because the Stoves Alliance, for obvious reasons, are insisting that they're fine and that the harm is mitigated. But yeah, it is what it is. They're not good. And there's an interesting exhibition about there was an interesting exhibition about in Dickens's house, actually, in his old house, about the air pollution crisis in Victorian London, and how long that took to be, how long it took for people to accept that there was a problem, because back then air pollution, as it's starting to be now again, is associated with such positive aesthetics, you know, a roaring fire, Christmas scenes. It's all this kind of very whimsical attachment to what is actually really, really harming us. So there's all that to kind of deal with, and it's quite an interesting challenge, I think, for the framing of this kind of campaign. So yeah, most recently I'm just going to touch on this very briefly, but we've been campaigning to ditch diesel in light of the 2015 Dieselgate scandal that's rearing its ugly head once again. So diesel cars at this time were allegedly fitted with these defeat devices to artificially reduce emissions to pass EU tests. However, real-world emissions were found by the government tests to be higher than under the laboratory conditions. So to date, due to legal conditions, we do not have full transparency about the air that we breathe. So we are keen to raise awareness about the dangers of diesel, and also to for the manufacturers to recall cars that in any way pose this threat. We work together with with Mums for Lungs, we work together with active travel and safer streets organisations, because we want policy level change to enable the freedom and multiple health benefits of safe walking, wheeling and cycling via infrastructure. I think it's really important to join up our thinking, and it doesn't always happen, but it's so important, and it helps build up a wider picture. So it's not just about, I think that way people view it less of taking things away, taking their cars away and so on, and more it's part of a much wider vision. So it's very difficult to encourage people to change their behaviour by taking something away. But if you take something away and replace it by something, and then you can sell that and you can frame that in terms of active travel and safer streets for our children, safer in terms of chemically, and also in terms of their safety from collisions, and also the sort of the beautification of our lives and working with nature, more green spaces. I think we can form new ideals away from the roaring fires and towards green spaces, and being out and about with our children in that delightful picture of the space hopper we saw earlier. So this will allow children, the elderly and everyone in between to thrive in environments that work with what nature has to offer and are far less dominated by car use, because that is what needs to happen. I saw someone in the comments mentioning that quite rightly earlier. It's not, I think a lot of these, when it comes to climate change, sort of big tech, very keen to try and cut the Gordian knot, as it were, and try and invest lots and lots of money into probably quite temporary and ineffective and costly technological interventions, when what we really need to do is, like I say, we need to reduce car use drastically and have a new vision. As a clean air campaigner, when I found out a couple of years ago that an illegal landfill site in Launders Lane in Rainham was constantly smouldering with underground fires and bursting into flames each summer, creating great plumes of black smoke, infiltrating playgrounds, in schools, in the nearby park, and in people's homes, I knew I had to do everything I could to try to help. Rainham is an area in Havering, one of the most deprived in London, and a dumping ground for quarries, landfills, you name it. I contacted everyone I could think of, and while I waited and hoped for ways forward, I lobbied the council on behalf of the groups I'm in and raised money for the Launders Lane Crisis Fund by standing in nearby Hornchurch with a charity bucket. What follows was more effective than that. Not least because I was on someone else's patch and I hadn't really the knowledge of, I don't think I was really supposed to be there. Anyway, hearing from residents at local Launders Lane crisis meetings broke my heart. Smoke regularly fills the air in nearby playgrounds. I was saying schools never shut. People are forced to keep their windows shut, even though the danger of indoor air pollution is just as bad. And if you don't have expensive contraptions like air purifiers, the advice does tend to be open your window, ventilate your home. So what are they supposed to do in Rainham? You open the window and you're leaving yourself more susceptible to all the smoke coming from the illegal landfill, or shut your window, have that smoke from outside and the added compounded indoor pollution. It really is a horrific situation. Residents report waking up in the night with burning sensations in their throat and vomiting when the smoke is at its worst. Children, especially those with existing health conditions, as I was saying earlier, including cancer, are suffering disproportionately, and Rainham residents feel like the forgotten people of Havering. I took the opportunity to take Havering Council to court via a judicial review, the High Court, very recently, as a desperate last resort to put these fires out and bring justice to these forgotten children of Rainham. Myself and Clear the Air in Havering have recently taken, we actually expect the verdict imminently. We were told before Easter, and hoping no news is good news. And they're looking at all the evidence appropriately. I think the issue with that is that the actual contaminated land statutory regulations are just ridiculously unfit for purpose. And also the testing that Havering were doing, all the testing I'm pretty sure, as far as I'm aware, all testing for air pollution is annualized on average. So after over a period of a year, you get these averaged these average data findings, whereas in Launders Lane you get these great spikes of PM 2.5 in the summer months, and that's when the site is actually bursting into flame. And repeated exposure to short-term spikes, that has been evidenced as being incredibly harmful to health, but I think more research would be really useful in that area. So yeah, basically, if the land is designated as contaminated, Havering Council have designated it as uncontaminated, and that's what we're challenging. But if they were to designate it as contaminated, this would give Havering Council and the Environment Agency specific legal obligations to clean up the site once and for all. Of course, the polluter should be paying, but we all have an obligation here. That's how I see it. Me, reporters, you guys, political parties of all persuasions, we've all got a part to play, Havering Council included, even though the polluter, which has changed hands over the years, because this has been going on for 20 years plus, is are these landowners, private landowners. The original one is in prison, by the way, for multiple crimes, quite serious crimes. However, the law is currently, very, very poor at protecting children from pollutants, including not only tiny particles that enter the bloodstream, but the dangerous chemicals that these particles carry. So PM 2.5, a cluster of this liquids and matter of unknown character, really, but they carry cargo, and that can be very, very dangerous, even more dangerous. And yeah, this is largely unquantified because it's very difficult to test the soil on illegal landfills. So it's such an undulating, uneven mess, this massive landfill. It's difficult to test it, and the will and the funds are not always there, and certainly not in our experience. Okay, back to more general stuff that I've been doing. So the biggest challenges I face have been a consequence of the lack of government policy on tackling air pollution more generally, leading to the subject being harnessed by right-wing politicians where I live as a subjective culture war, as opposed to an objective health crisis. In the absence of robust policies for clean air and active travel, which I know are actually being developed, So it's not all bad. It is left to campaigners to join the dots, and that is what's been happening. So the hardest thing to do is campaign for deeply unpopular piecemeal initiatives to mitigate the effects of air pollution, like school streets, the ULEZ expansion, and against diesel and wood burners in a right-wing borough, in the municipal town of which, Romford is what I'm talking about here, has been successfully swayed by a Conservative politician who takes it upon himself to campaign against wokery in lieu of social justice. So you can see, you know, this kind of it's very difficult when you the ULEZ is successful. It's been very, very successful. And why should inner London have all the clean air and not outer London? It was really important that Havering got access to that equality. But it's about framing that, and it's about talking about this in a way that the way that emphasizes co-benefits, I think. So it's not just about what you can't do, as was said earlier. It's about, you know, it's not about taking things away. It's about co-benefits, and it's about new framing mechanisms. It's about, you know, maybe instead of talking about climate justice, I've learned more thinking about health benefits and fun, you know, as opposed to something that's a chore. In spite of these fairly coordinated pushbacks, the truth remains, in the words of the World Health Organization, there is no safe level of air pollution, and yet air pollution remains the greatest environmental risk to public health, causing an estimated 7 million premature deaths globally each year. We know that the poorest in our communities don't even own cars, and yet widespread car dependency disproportionately affects low-income individuals, children, the elderly, disabled people who may not drive but still suffer from the toxic consequences of car-dominated spaces. So my current legal action has gone beyond Launders Lane, in concordance with being upheld by a wonderful wider campaign for Zane's Law called the UK Landfill Campaigns, and I spoke up for Launders Lane just today in Parliament about this. I encourage you to join me in lobbying your councillors and MPs to commit to supporting Zane's Law in a motion, and also Ella's Law, because a clean, sustainable environment and clean air should be a human right for all children, not the privilege that it currently is. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ruth. It's really nice to have that personal perspective from you and your journey and campaigning on these different issues. Hearing what you've got to say about putting sort of children, the elderly, disabled people at the heart of these campaigns is so important and really inspiring. So thank you so much for sharing your story with us. I think that we all of these different talks that we've had today have had similar threads that have run through them, you know, the impact on health, the impact on climate, the impact on our futures for everybody, not just for children and young people, but for us as adults as well. And it's something that, like, I think it was Gary said, the answers are there. You know, we have the answers to this issue. Like, it's not a pie in the sky, we need to figure it out. We already have all the answers there. And so we just need, like in so many issues with regards to climate and health, it's the political will that is not there. And so one thing that we obviously need to do is to keep pushing politicians. It's great to hear that you've been speaking in Parliament, Ruth, and I'm sure that there's loads of different campaigners that are pushing for these changes. So I know that there's been a lot of chat in the chat. There's been a lot of chat in the chat. So I'd like to try and find some questions. And I know that our speakers have already been putting different bits and pieces of information in. Sue, I don't know if you want to ask your question about ULEZ. I think it's yes. Go on, Sue. Thanks.
So my question is, all of this stuff sounds really sensible. I'm just curious as to why the people on the right wing are so hostile to all these ideas for what you'd think would be improving everyone's lives. Why are they so anti? You know, what all we hear from them is, oh, you're trying to take our cars away. Like, what's really behind that? Where's their mindset?
Yes, just hands up or unmute yourself so I can see. Let's go for Ruth. You have your hand up, and then we'll go to Gary.
I live in an extremely right-wing borough. You know, Reform are in danger of getting seats in the next local election, and and I would say it's a combination of things, but it's actually, I think it's evidence to be driven by right-wing politicians. You know, so there's this narrative that they are harnessing, which splits people's consciousness. So if you think about it, we've got Launders Lane that I've been talking about, which is emitting all this air pollution, partly because they can see it. Okay, so like they could in the Victorian times, all black and thick black smoke, and they can see it. Air pollution is invisible, so it's really difficult to kind of conceptualize something invisible and to try and to reify something invisible and contextualize that. So I think it's a combination of air pollution being invisible, and therefore it's really difficult to kind of appreciate the risks when you're so used to using your car, and it's such a convenience, and there are so many tropes around that, around freedom and around success and all these kind of social implications that someone on the right might be more susceptible to. But yeah, like I said, there's a disconnect. So they're terrified of the air pollution, which is, still air pollution coming off Launders Lane. But when it comes to exhaust air pollution, or air pollution from vehicles, it's a completely different. So it's like cars taking away our freedoms, and it quickly disintegrates into Islamophobia. And then that is harnessed by the right-wing politicians. So this is what I was talking about when I touched upon a culture war. It is very much, it feels like it's coming from the people, your everyday people, and then being harnessed by the politicians. But actually, I've read an article about it being the other way around. Actually, it's the right wing in this organized attempt to kind of, it's a lot more sophisticated than that. But yeah, I mean, breaking habits, particularly when they're associated with these kind of success paradigms in a capitalist society, I think that's got something to do with it.
Thanks, Ruth. Gary?
Thanks, Ruth.
Yeah, I mean, I was caught in the crosshairs of the debate about ULEZ, and you can go and look into the Daily Telegraph, if you like that sort of thing, and see some of the material that appeared there about me and my colleagues. And the reason was that, we're seen as part of the evidence base, and if we could be discredited through this process, then it would in turn discredit the case that the mayor was trying to put forward. And it was a really unpleasant time. There was a huge amount of dis and misinformation circulating, as well as the threats that many of my colleagues suffered. What to do about this? I mean, undoubtedly, I really love, Ruth, your framing of, reversing your sentence, we need objective views of the health crisis, not subjective views or framing around a culture war. And undoubtedly, ULEZ was seen as a way as a wedge issue to be able to divide the London electorate. But I think this goes wider, and that's why I chose to talk about positive visions of air pollution. And it's exactly the same in our climate crisis as well. All we see reported in the news is the difficulties and barriers associated with everything from heat pumps to insulating homes to decarbonising our energy systems. And what we're not hearing enough of is what a society might look like if we can take those steps. So in terms of, as I laid out earlier on, if we reduce air pollution, then we will reduce the health burden, and there's good evidence on that. It needs the scientific community, and it needs politicians to be out there with politicians, especially with a positive vision of what change could look like. Because at the moment, without any positive vision of what change could look like, we just leave a vacuum out there for those people who are evidence deniers or are supported by the large money that came to the fore through you, Les, to really fight against these things.
Thanks, Gary. Speakers, just come in, unmute and put your hands up whenever you want. Okay. Okay, I'll go to Andy, who's got their hand up while I find another question in the chat. So, Andy.
Oh, hi guys, I'm a Green Party councillor. I'm also emergency department consultant here in Exeter. And you know, go back to, was it Jenny? Sue's question about, you know, why is it that people have these entrenched views? And you know, Gary's sort of talking about the science there, and the other two speakers talked about how they've really sort of driven forward something that's sort of tangible. What I see when I sort of discuss things with people, it's over 20 years, it's been quite incredible. What I've found with people is if you want to appeal to them, you've just got to understand that a lot of people do not make decisions based on facts, based on evidence, based on necessarily what's in front of them. They make decisions based on an emotional response to what is provided to them. And I think that's why the far right in particular does very well on wedge issues, and how the Tories try to do well with the sort of anti-woke stuff. It's appealing to emotions, not to facts. And so I think to get inside people's heads, if you want to, you've just got to recognize, or it would be my personal experience from being people's doctors, that when you just provide them with facts, it's not enough. You've got to absolutely engage them on an emotional side for them to then buy into what you're saying. So I see it every day in my job. I think politicians need to do a bit more of that. And I think, you know, people like Nigel Farage, he's not interested in facts. He is interested in manipulating people's emotions, their less rational side. And you know, Gary, who's I've got a massive crush on. I read many of his books. I wish he was in the room. I'd be getting him to autograph them. I think, you know, he's an absolutely stellar scientist. He's a scientist, you know, and it's quite hard to get people to go, yeah, I love science. I totally get that. Boom, I'm done. Let's just one fact to just finish on is, you know, up until when I was a kid, you know, about a third of the population still smoked. Everyone knew it was bad for them, but they still smoked. It's just a little bit of a thing to reflect on. People are not necessarily interested in facts. They live an emotional life.
Thanks, Andy, for that comment. And I think you're right. One of the things that the left struggles with, and especially us in the Greens, is storytelling, and really being able to tell a story around the vision that we have and the changes that we want to make and the reason we want to do it. Yes, Gary, come back on that. Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks, Andy. It's good to meet someone from my fan club. But I'm totally there with your points, and you talk about, you know, we've got to start creating narratives around this of our own. I'm in the evidence business, and I try my best out there to use, as I've done this evening, you know, opportunities like this to create narratives around the data so that people will follow it. Those of us in the evidence business, well, it's really hard to be able to counter these feelings with facts. I mean, and the harm for this comes, I sit on a government committee. I'm not speaking for the government committee, but we did a part of a report we did quite recently, talked about mis and disinformation and this political debate. And those people that want to come forward with these views and these kind of populist, objectionist views to things don't actually have to win an argument. All they do is they have to render it too toxic for politicians to go close to. Look at low traffic neighbourhoods, for instance. You don't need to win the argument. You just need to render it too toxic for people to take forward. The only thing in terms of what we have on our side from the evidence world where we can try our best, and I'm training a lot of early career researchers as part of the Clean Air programme to be able to tell their stories in the media, to be able to go out to church halls and to be able to tell stories about that convey evidence. The only other one coming forward really is so-called information inoculation, whereby if we can talk enough about things that are evidence-based, then when a piece of misinformation or disinformation comes along, people can say, oh, yeah, no, I've heard something different from a reliable source, that's not the case. That's all I have in my armoury, I'm afraid.
Thanks, Gary. Yes, Ruth.
I just want to come at this from a kind of a different angle as well. I mean, in a way, what we need, I think, I completely agree with everything that has been said, but like what Gary's doing, like, as a scientist, and he really is leading this conversation. I've been following Gary for ages. You know, he groundbreaking articles that appear and make you feel like you're doing the right thing, especially here in Havering. So, goodness me, and you think, yes, this is right. The facts are here. But what I hope he's really doing, alongside campaigners like me, is changing policy. It doesn't feel like you're changing policy all the time, because it takes time to change the policies and the laws. But you know, when people were up in arms when about seatbelts, I'm not wearing a seatbelt, that's a infringement on my freedom. But you make it policy, and soon enough it becomes habit. So while it feels like, well, I completely agree that talking to someone in the Wetherspoons perhaps about Gary's papers may not be as compelling as someone with a pint in their hand and a silly face who's somehow managed to get on Question Time yet again. Is, that's one thing, but the policy change, the conversation moves on, and it becomes imbibed into our habit. So actually, I think the facts do more than it looks like they're doing. They're part of a longer game.
Absolutely. Thanks, Ruth. I think a lot of our politicians these days are, I want to say, scared to be the bad guy. And sometimes the policies that we need are going to make you unpopular in the short term. But like you say, it's the long game that we're playing. And it's things like this that if you just take the leap and make the policy and make it law, and take the impact of being a little bit unpopular with people for a short while, then the long-term gains in terms of health, climate, will be immeasurable. So yes. Okay, we're flying towards the hour, and so I'm going to find one more question in the chat, and I'm also going to pre-warn our speakers that at the end of this, I will ask you for 30 seconds, 1 minute of take home for people. So like, what do you want people to take home from this webinar, from this discussion? So you've just got a little bit of time to think about what you want to say there while I find the final question. That I'm going to try and find one that everybody can feed into. Okay, Rosaline Howard, would you like to ask your question? I know Gary's put a few links in the chat there.
Sorry, I was unmuted. Thank you. Well, my question was whether there is any research being done to find out what the impact on air pollution more widely beyond these shores is of the wars that are being conducted in the Middle East, in Ukraine, is particularly at the moment, but also in the past, the Iraq War. I always felt that the amount of bombing that went on during the Iraq War must have been having a tremendous impact on air quality. So I was just wondering if there's any research being done on that. And in fact, Gary did forward a couple of links in the chat, one about Gaza and one about Ukraine, which I've made a note of. Thank you very much for that. I don't know if there's anything you could tell us about what that research says, or if anyone else can comment on that.
I think it's a great question, and it's one that's cropping up more and more in the talks that I give, and it's also cropping up more and more when I sit round expert advisory panels. I organised a conference at Christmas at Royal Society of Chemistry, and it was raised there by our keynote speaker as well. I'm afraid I can't help you a tremendous amount on it, but just have a look at, there are people thinking about this and there is good evidence. So all I can suggest is have a look at the two studies that I put forward. One is a peer-reviewed paper about Ukraine. The other one is from UN Environment Programme. So these are pretty authoritative sources. The Guardian, who I have a side hustle working for, has also been trying to highlight the air pollution effects of not just war and conflict as it happens, but the air pollution and environmental impacts of the whole sort of defence structures and industry as well. And we do need to be looking at this, you know, how are we going to decarbonise the defence structures and processes as well. And I just don't think I can't really answer your question, but I agree with you, there's not enough being thought about this, and it's not being discussed enough. And we are going to be spending a lot of money on defence really quite soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rosalind. Thanks, Gary. I recognise that question wasn't ideal for all of our speakers, so apologies there. It was the only one that I could find that was a question, not a comment. Okay, so as we are nearing the end now, I will go to our three speakers and ask you to just give a short summary or a takeaway or something for people to look at when they go home this afternoon. And I will start with Tom, if that's all right.
Thank you. Yeah, so my first of all, thank you for those powerful presentations. My key takeaway is that we can do things as a community which are really quite remarkable. We don't need to wait for our politicians to drive change, legislate change. And as Ruth showed and others show, that community-led action can really make a difference. And I think within Gloucestershire, we now have a really significant chance to get rid of a horrendously polluting monster, costing huge expenditure of public money, but instead focus on creating much better spaces, looking after our environment. And so really pushing our local government and really supporting community drive to make a difference, to make a change. I do think we can be an exemplar. We are an exemplar in Stroud and Gloucestershire, and I would very much hope that some people on this call or the listen afterwards will also be part of that going forward.
Thank you so much, Tom. I will go to Ruth next.
I loved Tom and Gary's talks, and I just really want to reiterate some of that. I think something we all agreed on was that positive campaigning is such an important thing to do. So, especially being the Green Party, we can't. I think it's better to positively campaign than talk about what's wrong with things. It's easy to be seduced into that narrative, isn't it, with air pollution, because it is indeed dangerous. We've heard the facts around that. But we need, doom and gloom doesn't necessarily mobilize people. So I loved what the two guys said about, we don't want to fall into that trap of opening that chasm and then having it filled by the right. I think to mitigate that, we look at it as a fun challenge. How can we come together to create a new narrative and not try to reinvent the wheel, but look at your local school streets, look at your local Mums for Lungs or various other clean air campaign groups, join up with them, and whatever level is doable for you, it all counts, and it will shape the way you look at the world, how you see active travel, how you how you view the world for your children, and it will mean that when you go into your workplaces and so on, slowly the conversation will change because your passion for clean air will be in these pragmatic terms of how we can shape the new vision, will start to spread because that kind of good news does.
Thanks so much, Ruth. And finally to Gary.
Yeah, I real, hat off to Ruth and to Tom for the evidence they've brought forward here and the personal stories they've attached to it, and also the successes that you've had, especially Tom, in terms of using the processes that are there. I really just go back to my thought, which is really the theme of my presentation, and that we need positive visions. And as I was saying before, if we don't have positive visions of the future, we just leave a vacuum open for other people to put in negative visions of all of the difficult steps that are there on the way. Perhaps maybe I'm being naive here, but I look back a little bit, and I don't know if anyone's old enough to remember Tomorrow's World on the television, but we used to look at technology and the future, and it was going to bring us exciting things. It was going to bring us, less work to do, more, more excitement, more interaction, coloured television. And there was this whole culture around from the 1970s about the white heat of technological change and what it was going to bring to us. And we need those things about our net zero or climate transition that surely has to be before us. We have to do this. There's no real debate about it. It's just a question of how we do it. But to bring that about in terms of what we can get, we need positive vision. And that, I'm afraid, is lacking in a lot of the dialogue. And also it's really lacking from our political leaders. And that's what's missing.
Thanks so much, Gary. And thank you really to all of our speakers for taking the time to come out tonight and talk to us. It's so great to get all these different perspectives, whether you're from a campaigning background, scientific background, community organizer background, like all of those different, we have to come at it from every angle. Like, we're not going to win just by approaching it in one way. So I think that we need all these different perspectives, and we need all these different ways of fighting for change and pushing for change within our communities and within on a national and local basis. I think we've talked a lot about today, the Green Party is often seen as or pitched as by the right as the party of no, of like, no, you can't do that, and you can't have that, and you can't have a car, and you can't have meat, and you can't have X, Y, or Z. And I think that we're really trying to reframe the narrative, and all of our speakers today have talked about that. Let's stop looking at the negative and let's look at the positive. Let's put this on the benefits to our health, the benefits to our communities, the benefits to our society. And I think that that's what we need to focus on, and bringing that positive perspective and reframing the narrative and owning the narrative. And at every level, Greens are putting pressure on people in local and national government and internationally as well to make the changes that we need in order to tackle air pollution. But it can always be more, and it can always be strengthened. And I think that that's what we need to continue to push for. So thank you to everybody who's joined us this evening. It's always great to have our Cloud Cafe community here, and we'll be putting this recording along with the slides and different images that our speakers have shared on the YouTube channel, and you can have a look at it there. And I do recommend having a look at all the bits and pieces that our speakers have recommended. So Mums for Lungs, the different Guardian articles, and what's going on locally with the Stroud incinerator, and keep on top of it. So thank you everybody for joining us. Thanks for your input, and we will see you next month, and have a lovely evening. Thanks everyone.